All right. So small group today. Welcome to the clean call. I'm sure I'm supposed to say a whole bunch of other things that I probably won't totally cover, but I'm coming to you today from Wasanich territory, traditional territory, and I'm here on North Pender Island in British Columbia in Canada. And I work at the University of Washington, and I'm on the Clean Leadership Board. And so I'll be hosting our informal conversation today. Do we want to do a quick round? Next on my screen is Don.
Hi there, I'm Don Haas. I'm also a member of the Clean Leadership Board, and I am the Director of Teacher Programming at the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, New York, where I've long been telecommuting from Buffalo. And one of the reasons I got on today is I'm trying to shepherd through a bunch of clean NSTA proposals, and wanted to see if anybody who's involved in those had any questions. I need to get back to it and wrap it up. They're due at midnight tonight, and I touch base with there are now 4 sessions, and make sure that there's a submitter for each one of those 4 for one thing. And I'm not positive of that, so I might multitask a little bit while we're going today to look through what people have put into the Google Doc since the last time I looked at it. And if you're, I'll put the Google Doc link in the chat too.
All right. So we'll add that to our sort of evolving agenda for our informal conversation. Eric, you're next.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Eric Havel, I'm an environmental educator for quite a few years, probably about 30 years, mostly informal science education, currently working with the Community Resources for Science. We're doing a lot of PDs for teachers and educators. So we've got another round, I can talk more about it later, but another round of, maybe 8 to 10 partners doing spring PDs around environmental science with a focus on outdoor education and climate change specifically. So excited to share that opportunity if any of you or colleagues would like to jump in and run one, or even just point, directional pointers to things that you're already doing.
That's great. Wendy.
Hi there, I'm Wendy Abshire. I'm the director of the American Meteorological Society's education program, normally located in Washington, D.C. I'm joining you from Arvada, Colorado. And these are the ancestral lands of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Sioux people. And I am also a member of the Clean Leadership Board, and I'm glad to be here with all of you today.
Thank you. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Corin in Santa Cruz, California. I'm at Stanford in the Psychiatry and Psychology department. I've spent the last 4 or 5 years adapting climate communication with entertainment education.
Cool. I've learned a lot from Emily in the last year. I was just like, I'm starting to dream about it. Amy.
Hi there, everybody. I'll be on video in a second here. I am the K-12 program manager from 10 Strands, working in environmental literacy in California.
Thank you. Ginger, are you in the room? I'm deeply fascinated by Ginger's wall hanging. Okay, we'll grab Ginger when she comes back. All right, Dawn, do you want to, maybe we should do the NSTA sessions just of any questions you have, just to make sure that we get that at the top of that.
And I just scrolled through and it looks.
Wait a minute, let's do Ginger. Ginger, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, my dogs were barking, so
no worries.
to secure them. I'm Ginger. I'm in the Richland, Washington, and the traditional lands of the Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Umatilla people, and I'm a non-formal science educator and local community activist.
That's great. All right. And Nancy, we're just introducing ourselves. Do you want to introduce yourself as well? Nancy?
Looks like Nancy's looking for the right button to push.
Okay, I'm going to give her a minute. Go ahead, Don.
So I just scrolled through the Google Doc, and it looks like all 4 of the sessions have fleshed out descriptions and I'm hopeful they've all designated somebody to submit, but I'll look through that after we're done and follow up with folks on each of the sessions. So I think we're good as long as somebody's going to submit each one. So
That looks great.
and I'll go ahead and share and say what those sessions are for everybody's info. Excuse me. So 4 sessions, all sponsored by Nesta. So there's a elementary grade level, which I think we probably ought to tweak that name a little bit so people know what it is. And that's being coordinated by Alicia Christensen and Anna Gold. Then session 2 is how to teach with data and tools. And again, we ought to put climate in the title of each of these. Then the session I'm on is how to inspire action and facilitate discussion. And then the session 4, which was just added after I had a conversation with Frank yesterday, is climate empowerment. And if you go to this document and you click on those titles, you can scroll down to see maybe that's not working. It should take you down to the description for it, which is here for each one of those. I'll fix that. So Deb, do you know if one of you 3 is planning to be the submitter?
I potentially could. Do you know if they're having a limit on the new submission portal, if you can only submit 3 like normal?
I don't know.
Okay, because I'm submitting a bunch for our lab as well. So I'll check with Frank today. I'll harass him about it. If I'm not submitting it, he can.
Okay.
So yeah, one of us will. And yeah, it's so funny. I'm like, oh look, I'm doing one. No, that's good though. And I do want to also just note for folks here, I think I mentioned at some point that there's another Deb Morrison in climate work.
Yes.
I don't know if I mentioned that. So anytime anybody uses my name, can you put the L initial in my name if you're meaning me? Because it's confusing. It's getting confusing between the 2 of us.
Yes, that is understandable.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so maybe if we mark who's submitting them, that would be good too.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
And I'm just going to assign that back to Frank.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I think I did that on mine. I will ask the others to do that. Yeah, okay. So can submit. I will change that to will.
And is it midnight Eastern time?
It's midnight Eastern time, yeah.
Okay.
I believe that's right anyway. Go with that assumption.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and I'll also note before switching off this subject, in the process of switching off this subject, is that Deb and I are doing a clean session. When is that? In March?
Beginning of March.
Beginning of March on diversity and inclusion and maybe other labels than that in climate education. So that's another reason that I'm on today, is to gather insights for that. And Deb's question that she asked at the top is a good one. And now I'll stop sharing and listen.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to repost our question. Are there any other announcements or things that folks want to talk about today in our conversation? Oh, Emily, you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Yep, I've got a real quick one.
Yep.
There's a colleague I have, Arvind and Helen, 2 colleagues, who shared a paper that was just published for entertainment theory. So for folks who are interested in climate, but maybe new to the entertainment education section of what I do, it's a pretty good overview. So I'll just drop a link in the box.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, that reminds me, I'm gonna drop a link for an article that I just saw yesterday on essentially on fear and climate education, which looks really interesting.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, abstract at this point.
I also was curious if folks had seen if Frank had shared the policy brief that came out of the Netherlands on Action for Climate Empowerment. I'll share that as well if folks haven't seen that. Because I thought it was really helpful in understanding what Action for Climate Empowerment is. I'm writing a response brief about like what is justice in climate empowerment, but it was really helpful. And I talked to the author of the brief. He's an Italian person who's living in the Netherlands right now, who he's really trying to unpack and do a critical analysis of the word empowerment and what we mean by that when we say that and how it's used in different ways in different societies around the world. So that's been awesome to really think with him about. And he's got a great name, Alessandro Caprini. I'm like, how Italian is that? So perfect. Okay, other shares? Okay. All right, here is the brief from, there's a few different folks here. There's also some work going on in Austria, but I thought this was helpful. All right, really, really helpful having those kinds of shares out of the research literature, especially when they're all over the place, because that's what I found in the climate change literature right now is it's just so scattered in different fields that it's really, really helpful to be aware of it as it unfolds. Nancy, if you have your mute under control, do you want to introduce yourself in?
Yes, I'm Nancy Klock-Grinick. I'm working with Emily in Santa Cruz on a pilot of the ACE framework. We're connecting it up with our own city is just commencing a year-long engagement process, and I had the opportunity to write the principles of the engagement for the contractor they were hiring. They have just designated someone. Those principles are still in there, but we're now working to shift the phrase from what I had been calling climate engagement to climate empowerment, and encode all of the ACE framework in it. And we're also working closely with others on a mapping process, hoping to connect it to the ACE process of identifying social mapping, identifying who the players are, who the constituencies are that we need to reach. And Emily is developing geospatial mapping and the idea of putting what she calls, I should let you speak for yourself, Emily, but anyhow, that's moving along very nicely right now.
That's terrific. It's really interesting. I think all of these things are so synergistic because the brief that I've been working on, and Nancy and I are also working on another piece of the work together in different ways. But one of the things I found in response to the work by Alessandro in the Netherlands was this idea of how we take those principles and really clearly understand what the like essence of them is for the work, right? And so I liked the brief that he wrote. I liked the format it was in. And so I took a bunch of the thinking from the ACE framework over the winter and it's been compressing it into like a 3-page brief. So that'll be helpful for you. I'll shoot it out on the network once we have it. And I reached out to Fleur at the UN to see if she wanted it labeled as part of the UN ACE work so that we keep it in the same loop together as countries start to produce things, or if we should just produce it out of the University of Washington. So I'm not fussed either way. All right, any other announcements? Our paper around the process, oh, sorry, Ginger, I'll come right back to you. Our paper that Sati Cintuan Rodriguez, Haley Krim, myself, and a few others wrote around the process that we used to guide the ACE process last year, it got published in a special issue for, it's not out yet in publication like in the world, but it got accepted, minor revisions. And so, and it got accepted to the special issue for COP26. So we're like, woo! So we're very excited about that. And so we will have a full process paper to be able to share on how that work was done. So that was awesome. Sorry, Ginger, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought I would mention that I participated in the ECOS call this morning.
Oh, I missed it. I couldn't get on.
I don't know where we're going to go, but they're trying to figure out, you know, what the next steps for the ECOS process are. And after my talking about communications and education working together. I was like, oh, duh. I guess I should get involved with ecos. So we'll see where that goes. I think we had like 4 breakout sessions and
Oh, good.
8 different proposals of how to move forward. So people are going to kind of cut and paste, and I think we might end up having to have another kind of charrette call. So.
Well, that's great. I actually got up for it, which was really early for me, and
Yeah.
couldn't get the link.
Oh,
So
no.
my registration didn't go through. I talked to Laura, and then she got back to me too late. Oh well.
Yeah, I was an hour late. My alarm didn't go off because it's like I need to figure out there's like the do not disturb thing. So something.
Nice.
But I still was able to participate in the bulk of it. So that was
Great. Okay. All right. So I'm wondering about sharing thinking around this question today. And the reason I asked this question, and we can go different ways as people sort of unfold what they're thinking, but one of the things that came up or has come up a lot recently, especially as the Biden team in the US is unfolding their work around climate action, is the language of climate justice or equity in climate. And that term is complicated and has a lot of history to it. And I thought it would be helpful for us to think about, like, really think in practical examples, not in general statements, but in practical examples about like what we do and why we do it and what challenges maybe we have as we engage in equity and justice work and what that means to us. And, you know, the reason I'm think this is important for us is, one, I think it's always important for us to acknowledge why we even care, if we care about equity and justice, what motivates us. And I also think it's important to consider, like, what are the sort of guiding principles that are helping us do our work that were kind of hidden, to make them more explicit so we can kind of uncover our biases. And this became particularly important to me this week because you know, I am a critical race scholar and you know, have written in this space for a long time. I've worked in this space, and I hit still, and probably more often lately, I hit places where working in collaboration with people, things are not smooth. There's all sorts of tensions, and you have to kind of find your way through. And those gritty, hard places are the moment where you're like, why am I doing this? Because this is really emotionally exhausting, you know? And so what is it that holds me in this work, I guess, is my deeper question here. So I don't really want to necessarily go in a particular order, but if somebody wants to jump on any aspect of that and share something from their practice, it would be awesome to hear. Anybody want to throw in first? Knowing that there is like zero right and wrong spaces here. Don, do it.
Well, man, I've said before, I think that I've been, last month was my 35th anniversary as a professional educator, which makes me feel really old. And I feel like I've been on committees about this pretty much that whole time, and don't feel that we've made much progress on the on race and ethnicity issues, though on gender and gender diversity, we've actually made, I think, a lot of progress. So I'm on new committees that are that I regularly raise the question of what are we doing differently this time, and part of, I think, the answer to that that's encouraging is that it feels like there's more of a critical mass now of lots of people talking about this all at once in a way that you know, the events of last summer, excuse me, made more, I don't want to say urgent because it's been urgent all along, but made it more prominent, I guess, and got a lot of people and organizations on the same page. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about that, but I think part of my answer is that I just don't feel that we've cracked that nut of what we're doing differently this time nearly enough. And so So I guess the heart of my answer is I raise that question all the time.
Right.
and it seems to be getting more traction and getting people thinking about how to do some things differently. So and I guess one thing that maybe I've mentioned before, that Lisa White and I are co-chairing a what will now be a series of workshops on education and outreach for ocean science communication, education and outreach for scientific ocean drilling, that are generally framed as how to improve that, but running through the series of workshops unavoidably are issues of diversity and inclusion. And I think we are working pretty hard to bring in more than the usual subjects of folks who go to all the diversity and inclusion meetings. So there's one thing. And we have a PRI committee that's new on this as well, and trying to figure out what we're doing there too.
Cool. Wendy?
I just wanted to say exactly, I mean, my timeline's about as long as Don's. And I do sense that there is more critical mass, more attention, more willingness to do meaningful work, not lip service work. And yet most of the work we've had in front of us remains. So really, I'm just saying, Don, I think you hit the nail on the head about how I would describe these times. The conversation is more apparent and continues to be not one and done than it has been ever in my career, which leaves me hopeful. But the work to do, the work remains.
Heather? Emily?
I think why we do it is to build a healthy community society, right? Like there are higher aspirational goals there, but I think in the practice, we're nowhere near what we need to do. And I just want to name that funding and capacity has been a continuous barrier for all of the teams that I work with. A lot of people aren't included because they can't afford to be. If we had salaries for the people who we wanted to pull in as an invitation, it would get a lot more people and perspectives to the table. And it would provide better support for the people who are already bootstrapping this work. That's been a continuous challenge, instead of talking about it, actually, putting a lot more funding. And I don't know how a politer way to get around that point. I mean, it's an enormous amount of privilege that I'm here. Most of the other people who I'd like to be here can't be. So we've got to, if we're going to really move forward in a new way and address that, I think we need to start reappropriating, resources. And I don't think that that's just resources for that one issue. I think that the whole field has struggled with that piece for a while. I think that it's a tangible thing that we can do differently, though.
Heather? Eric?
Yeah, so maybe just thinking about what you're all saying, I'll give you all a tangible project I'm working on. So I'm working on a project that I'm actually meeting with a group of 4 high school youth from an AP Environmental Science course at Oakland Tech, which is a very diverse school in Oakland. It's actually, I grew up in Oakland, and it used to be considered, quote, the #3 school. And now it's very much like the #1 school in terms of academics and student performance and diversity. I mean, the diversity is incredible there. Like, I don't think there's any one ethnic group that sort of dominates at this point. It's proximate to UC Berkeley, so there's pathways, to Cal. And I'm meeting with them. The intention of the project is to create a video to get Oakland students outdoors. So my thought is that they'll be models or mentors for middle school youth creating video. And I'd like to create it around climate change, which is what they're studying in their AP Environmental Science class. And sort of my point of departure for conversations, kind of to your question, Deb, is listening first. Like, where are the students coming from? What are their backgrounds? What are their concerns? Because just looking at the names, I haven't met these students yet, but I'm assuming that they're students of color, a diverse group. So I'm excited to work with them. I've done a lot of youth work in this age bracket of high school. but I want to hear what their concerns are. And so much of our conversation in Clean has been around solutions being solutions oriented. So I think students really want to be forward thinking. So I guess I'm trying to, I'm sort of developing my intro today for them. It's at 1 o'clock, and figuring out just how I can step back and listen to each of them, but maybe model what I'd like to sort of have them share at the same time. So I want to share a little bit of my background and then step back and kind of listen, just to get a sense of where they're coming from and what their concerns are. And then the other question I sort of have, so listening, was sort of one answer to your question, Deb. And the second question is the umbrella. How much of an umbrella, especially in informal education, where I'll work with these students for a month, maybe I'll meet with them once a week, but I'm not a high school teacher, so I'm not going to see them for 9 months. So how much of an umbrella do I give them in terms of a topic? Because I've got a bunch of ideas for them that they could hang their hat on, or focus their video on. And we only have a month to work together. So for efficiency, I want to focus them, but to be really, really mindful of where they're coming from, I want to open the floor and give them sort of free rein to sort of help define their pathway in this video project. So I guess that's sort of a question I have, is how much of an umbrella, how much of a focus to give audiences. And I think it oftentimes has to do with the audience and the amount of time that you'll work with them.
It's funny because like the visual that comes into my mind is, what is it called? The Mendelbrot set, the one that's like the spiraling, kind of produces the spiraling figures that you can see really close, or you can come back and you still have these spiraling patterns. I often think about that with climate change. That climate change is like, you can stand back and look at it from here, or you can look really up close here. And it's always a point, like the system is everything, like is included in it. Because it's climate, right? And so like where you dive in to do learning and how you link that out to the pattern that people are creating in their mind as they learn more and more and more. And I mean, I've been learning in this area my whole life, really, but like, the last 30 years really intentionally. And still I come across stuff, I'm like, cool, how does that fit my puzzle? And I will always do that as we learn more. And so, yeah, I see that. And that's the challenge in teaching this, is how do you parse it into pieces that are still coherent and connect to these big principles? Yeah, Emily?
Well, Nancy was kind of mentioning some experimentation that we're doing locally. And I think that when it comes down to like the local level, it becomes easier for me, at least, to see opportunities. So instead of pulling, climate education out as a silo, like we're working with the Museum of Art and History to integrate the climate communication information into their existing programs. Not a separate program, it's integrated. And then like we have one teammate, Nancy Falstich, who runs a group called Regeneration. And like her and Tonia Heath are just beginning to, I think, do some work with some of like the South County Watsonville populations to see how they're getting their information, how are they already sharing information, and figuring out what they would like from engagement work. And I think that work is going to begin, and I really mean begin, because none of the work is funded, to go back to the funding, right? How to support, climate communication in the, community socially normalized ways, so I think it's almost like target audience by target audience, asking everybody how they need what, and then actually producing those resources. And I think that it's extremely labor intensive, and then interconnecting all of those resources. And so like, I don't think there is a quick way around that. Like we're like, okay, now we get to learn how to make radio programs in Spanish. Right. Like, okay, that's apparently a thing that we've got to learn how to do now. Like, so but I think that, like when you get into the practical, like, I think that set of conversations maybe can be standardized as a set of like, like a 5-minute video or like a 1-page summary of what that process is might actually provide some structure, like, okay, well, and who are your target audiences? How are they already receiving communication? What are the cultural norms there? What do they need? And I think this is one thing that I really appreciated about this community is that, you know, like I've heard a lot of talk about starting where communities are really at. So instead of coming in from the outside and saying, here's the thing we're going to give you that you need to do something with, but really asking people what they need first, and then trying to meet those community needs where they're at. And I think that that's one of the sort of like reframing pieces that I'm hopeful about this work. But I think to do that well, we need more resources, because otherwise we're just asking the questions and we can't actually execute any of it. I'm a little concerned that it's going to build more tension, really help.
Ginger?
So it'd be really cool if you two could partner with you. Only have a month, Eric, you probably can't do that. But I mean, wouldn't it be cool to talk about, you know, heat, extreme heat, smoke, and public health? And both of your groups deal with that, but how, you know, contrast and compare but I think, yeah, to the original question about how are we fostering equity and justice in our work, I think for me, I'm in a very white, very conservative area, but parts of it are 40 to 70% Latino, and probably 40% of those are undocumented, maybe more. And so what I'm doing is, like, I joined the local Diversity and Inclusion Council, and I'm, you know, follow and share information out to the local Justice Alliance. And I think what's really critical is to show up for them in their spaces over and over and over again, as much as we can, whether we have funding or not, but just to show them that, you know, hey, I'm happy to help you. Or the Latino Community Fund of Washington has an on-the-ground organizer here, and she's really young. So this is perfect because I get to mentor her. She's a great on-the-ground organizer, but she's like 23, just graduated. And so like the environmental stuff, she's super enthusiastic and excited about it, but she was a, you know, international business major or something at Seattle Pacific. So just being there for them, there for them, I think is so critical, and you know, letting them know that we are there when they have questions. And then hopefully they will come to us with their questions, and we can embed the environmental education into their programming, because I think that's the problem is we haven't been there for them, and we haven't defended them, and we haven't protected them, and we turned a blind eye for however many generations. And to suddenly be, you know, we're here to help, even if we individually are not doing it out of, you know, saviorism, that's probably how they're seeing it. So we need to be in their spaces for, so that's, you know, that's what I've been trying to focus on in Washington State and in my community.
Thanks very much for that. You know, the thing that you make me think about is that just show up kind of issue, because I think often the history of science, especially, is either like a domination kind of stance with certain things that have gone on, or an expert kind of stance where we come in as like, we know. And that's really problematic. And like showing up in a way that's just showing up and like getting to know and listening, like Eric's saying, listening to the community, listening to people, and figuring out how what your resources are fit with the needs of the community and like can support the work of the community. And like be in relationship. That's the one I would add, is that be in relationship. Like build a relationship with community, and then be in relationship, because like you might offer something to the community and maybe they're just not ready to take it from you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable at some point in the future. It just means maybe your relationship's not as well developed yet, and like you need to just continue moving along. So yeah, that would be the other piece I would name. Patrick.
Well, I just like a real quick concrete example. Yep. Like, you know, I volunteered to go hand out food on MLK Day. Does that have anything to do with environmental education? No. But
Right.
if they don't see me there with them reaching out to their community, then me wandering in and saying, hey, you guys should be paying attention to urban planning, it doesn't carry any weight.
Totally. Yep. Nancy, Amy, Patrick, I'll repost the question, Patrick, so you know where we're at. Nancy or Amy, anything to add?
Let Amy go first. I have a few things, but I'm still mulling over which of them to say.
I don't feel like I have anything super useful to say at this point, but I do appreciate hearing everybody's views. So sorry, Nancy, off to you.
Dang. I had been going to suggest in my Quaker way that we start with a period of silence and speak out of silence because it's such a deep question. And I'm realizing how much of my life has been involved with this question.
Mm-hmm.
Really, wow. I think I'm going to retreat, as I often do, into the analytic part of me, not so much the heart part right now, and just say I'm drawn to the idea of trying to pull apart, because it's a systems-wide question with many, many facets, that the issues and the answers are different in different situations. And it is also profoundly human. It's internal work. It's relationship with ourselves. It's relational work. It's a sense of who we are that keeps shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting, sometimes quite painfully. And it's also profoundly liberating. And it cracks us open and all kinds of new possibilities come in. And I find, wow, let me just take a moment if I could. I think I'll want to do two things. When I'm able, I would like to write a page or two, not actually written, but just almost an outline, just listing out the pieces, mapping out the pieces of what I'm talking about. The other is just to note that most of the resources we need to solve our problems and to live are tied up in social structures, some of which work pretty well, some of which are disastrous and destructive. And it circles back to the question of who's deciding where those resources come from and where they go and how they get used, etc. And the more the people who understand the real needs of health and well-being for different parts of the human world as well as the non-human world have significant say and ultimately the power to decide, then we're moving in the right direction. And the issues of exclusion from that decision-making, again, those occur partly structurally, and where it gets especially painful, they occur personally.
Oh, do we lose Nancy? Oh, I know the weather is sketchy for many folks across the US right now. Yeah, I think we've lost Nancy. Patrick, do you want to take a moment and just introduce yourself?
Because
there we go. You're cutting out a little bit, Nancy.
Okay. I probably had said enough. I think it's clear where I was headed. And other than just saying, when we talk about resources, the image is often how can we add resources to what we have to get this particular job done. And we have decades of successful pilots and success at the margins that never transforms how we actually do the work inside the institutions. So that's the question. How do we shape those bigger decisions? Because we have enough money. We have material resources are more problematic. We've got to cut back on what we do there. Yeah, so that's clear enough. I think I've said all that I wanted to.
No, thank you for that. Patrick, did you want to introduce yourself in and say hello?
Sure. I think at one time or another I've introduced myself to everyone on the call, but hey, I'm Patrick. I'm a PhD student at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I keep repackaging my intro description. So here's the latest. My research focuses on art science partnerships that catalyze community action on environmental and social justice issues. So that's where that is now. I think I'll throw it out there, you know, part of this work of equity and justice for me is really learning and asking others to be more intentional with language. And it occurs to me in my description of my own work. I started off thinking of it as a framework for integrating art and science. And there's some real problems with that definition. I think, first of all, a framework doesn't suit that model at all. It says we have a rigid system that one must stick to navigate that partnership, which is not commensurate with art and science partnership work. And integrate was a really interesting word to start with there, because it's what actually is happening. When I'm at an AGU meeting and I hear art and science are working together, what it means is that science is using art to communicate their work. And that's the form of integration that we've seen. And that word usually means in our cultural context that one field subsumes the other, and they don't stand side by side in any meaningful way. I was just in my creative climate communication course where I was really pushing students to complicate their narratives, because they were doing a reading response and I got a lot of them saying, skeptics think this, I will respond to them like that. I'm like, oh, skeptics, that one group of very similar people who you can address in the same way. And it's like, come on now, like let's move beyond this way of othering through labels that takes, okay, there's that group, thump, I will put them over there and think this way about them. And really moving into a space where we don't allow for that, where we stop grouping each other so we avoid the necessary work to pick apart those important conversations and relationships. I've been also trying to push in the context of decolonizing the academy and slow but necessary work on the simple things of asking professors to look at their syllabus and just compare how many white authors they have to how many non-white authors. And that's an exercise most have never done, if maybe in the last couple of years, but it is crazy how rare that has been, and not even considered. And second, always pushing, as I do on Clean as well, when folks say we should get that group to come talk to us, pushing that point, who are you showing up for? Like, which communities are we willing to make ourselves a part of to not appropriate the conversation? There's a few things on the question.
You know, that makes me think too about the different positions that we have in particular work, because I reread Bettina Love's book recently, the one on something about survival. I don't have it handy here, but it's great anyway. And in it, it has it's something about how can we do more than just survive, I think it is.
That's it.
And the thing that I found really interesting, I mean, I found lots of things interesting in that book. It's one of those books you should read like once a year. And that's it. Yeah, that's it. And we want to do more than survive. Yeah. And there's so many brilliant things in that summarize the work of hundreds probably of Black feminist scholars and from around the world. But one of the things that really stuck out to me is she talks about co-conspirators. And Megan Bang has also pushed on this, like maybe we should think about working in community as opposed to co-conspirators. So there's these different ideas, and I've been thinking about this for like a decade with different colleagues and collaborators of like, is an ally at work, but an ally puts me outside the work instead of in it with people, you know, and like, it's not their project, it's our project. Like, and I have a different role to play in that necessarily than perhaps like a tribal colleague that I might be working with. So like what our work is depends on who we are in society right now, what resources we bring to the project. And in any one moment, you know, like you're saying, I think Nancy said it, like the system's complicated, right? And as we tap into different moments to move the things forward, there's necessarily differences in the way that we do that. Sometimes it's you're right in there with teachers, talking to them and pushing them like you're talking about today, Patrick, with what you're doing with new people learning. But maybe sometimes you're also like in a boardroom being like, so why are we using resumes as the method by which we're hiring this faculty? Like, because that's accumulated privilege. Can we do something different? You know, like, so like there's all these different kind of moves that we're doing to try and change the way that geosciences look. Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot because I like the ones that are more in contact with learners, I understand better. The things that are more in the background, those are the things that I consider the hidden curriculum of anti-oppression work. And it's a problem because if we don't write about that hidden curriculum of the things that we do in like what Dawn's talking about, the committees that you're sitting on, if we don't talk about and write about those things, how are we being models to future anti-oppressionists to do that work? How do they know that work's there to do? Like, how do they see it? So I guess that's one of the questions I have. All right, any other thoughts, last thoughts? We have about 8 minutes left. And Nancy?
I just wanted, this is bringing up so much I won't go into, but Patrick, I wanted to say, I've had a lifetime ambivalent relationship with art. I am an artist, I sculpt, I draw, it means a lot to me at one level, and yet I've always mistrusted it. I didn't understand why it mattered. And there's something about what you said that just brought it home to me, because I'm a word person and I'm constantly tending to words and fighting against othering through labeling. That's been a lifetime process. But when you said that, I suddenly realized art is about the I-thou relationship. It's about the individual, the connecting in all the complexity and richness. And I just wanted to thank you. I just suddenly got something I've never quite understood before. So thank you.
I might add a thought, Deb.
Yeah.
I think I took that climate reality training, back in July, and one of the things they emphasized was telling our personal stories. How did we each enter the climate space specifically? And I think, Emily, addressing kind of what you said about this place of entitlement, and I felt that over the years, and that savior mentality certainly as the white male. And so, and at the same time, like having lost a full-time job after 22 years and really sort of resetting myself, I realized what my climate story was and how empowering that was to me to sort of start to piece that together and tell that. And I think to one of your questions, one of your ideas was, how much do we impart knowledge versus how much do we listen? So I think, like with the youth, how the climate system works, what the science and the mechanics of it are, is truly fascinating to me. Like, why are we in a drought in California right now, perpetual or seemingly more and more in this drought? So that's something I think, despite, doesn't matter what my background is or how I look, it's knowledge, and I want to impart that to them. And at the same time, sort of this idea of what a couple of you were talking about, local case studies, that's where I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to bring to lift up the voices of the youth, because there's tons of stuff happening in Oakland. And, you know, Oakland is this microcosm of diversity, right? So there's just tremendous opportunity there. And for the youth, so again, sharing that umbrella, that frame potentially, like here are 3 different groups doing really great work as examples, but then saying, hey, what else can you find? What excites you? Why you as a young Latina female, what excites you and what concerns you about climate change, you know, and what's happening in your community with that lens of sort of, not to be too Pollyanna, but positivity, like what's happening that's really, you know, moving the work forward in a way that's empowering to you. So it's not, there's that side, Ginger, that you said about the smoke and it's having impact in communities, absolutely, you know, just disproportionate levels, right? But there's also these really cool things happening in East Oakland around sustainable agriculture and carbon farming. So you got both, and you sort of want to tell both and hear and let the youth voices get, you know, again, get lifted up. So that's where I'm kind of coming from, is this like macro level, you know, local to global and everything in between is kind of what I'm thinking of it as. But if we can tell this big climate frame story and then really look at what's happening in Oakland, say specifically, in various communities, I think there's a really some neat things that could happen.
This is great. Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. That I put a citation in the chat window. That's a paper that I read years ago, and I met the author when she was just after, I guess, 5 years after this paper came out, and yeah, just really thoughtful. And it's what we're talking about, is how do we actually hear the resources that communities have and that we have as members of other communities, and how do we bridge across different communities in ways that are respectful and just. Yeah. And because we have resources too, you know, like we come from different communities, but maybe our values are out of whack with communities we're working with in different contexts. And so we need to think through, why would we bring these particular resources in this moment? Yeah. Awesome. All right, 3 minutes to go. Any last thoughts? You all make me think a lot.
I'll throw it out there. We have another informal discussion next week. We had some speakers cancel this month. It's a crazy time, but I think conversations like this are great, and I would push folks, if you're interested in guiding conversations like this, please let me know and I'll put it on the schedule, because I don't think a presentation always has to be our formulaic, I'm going to talk for 30, 40 minutes, here are my slides. But if you just want to guide a conversation and you have a set of questions you'd like to play with this community, I'd really encourage you to reach out to me, and let's get that going.
Absolutely. Thanks for being able to make it. I know your day was super busy today too, Patrick. We're all juggling so many different things. So thanks all of you for your thoughts. And Dawn, I'm going to stop the recording in a sec, but if you can hang on for a sec so we can like what's coming up for us. All right. Thank you all.
Yes, thanks all.
Thanks, Deb.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye, guys.